So the Netflix culture memo is the latest version of what Netflix used to call the culture deck. This culture deck was a document that Netflix launched for the first time in 2009 as a manifesto, fundamentally putting people over process, and it was a super important document that was complemented by the likes of Sheryl Sandberg that called this as probably the most important document to ever come out of the Valley. Now, the latest version, the Culture Memo, is actually a shorter version of the original Culture Deck, and Reed Hastings reportedly thanked more than 1,000 international employees for contributing to this new version. Now, also interesting to note here is the other transition from a more structured document, a more PowerPoint style presentation to the more narrative format that they use today. So if Netflix invested resources into redesigning this already hugely successful document, it's probably because they realized the importance of great communication skills and for their international workforce in particular. So besides this, I believe it's important to understand that despite the fact this document is not a mandatory read for anyone working or looking for a job at Netflix, it does give you some very interesting insight as to what types of people are they looking for, and a lot of intelligence over what's the best way to phrase your CV and to structure your communication throughout the interviewing process. So going over the latest version of the Culture Memo, it starts with the equivalent of Netflix mission statement. Entertainment, like friendship, is a fundamental human need. It changes how we feel and gives us common ground. Netflix is better entertainment at lower cost and greater scale than the world has ever seen. We want to entertain everyone and make the world smile. Then it goes on mentioning their 10 core values with some exemplifying behaviors for each. This should give you a better understanding of what they're looking for in new recruits on a very high level. For example, for judgment, they expect employees to make decisions based on the long term, not near term. For communication, they expect you to be concise and articulate in speech and writing. For curiosity, you should be able to see connections that others miss. Courage, you say what you think when it's in the best interest of Netflix, even if it's uncomfortable. In terms of passion, you are tenacious and optimistic. Selflessness, you seek what is best for Netflix rather than it is for yourself or your group. Innovation, you create new ideas that prove useful. Inclusion, you collaborate effectively with people of diverse backgrounds and cultures. Integrity, you are known for candor, authenticity, transparency, and being non-political. Impact, you focus on results over process. And then it actually goes on by explaining Netflix's 7 core leadership principles, which are the bread and butter of this document. The first leadership principles, that of having a dream team, is by far the most important of all of them, and here's a very interesting way to phrase this. The unusual part is that we give adequate performers a generous severance package so that we can find a star for that position. And there are some very interesting anecdotes presented with respect to this dream team concept, and the first is the difference between a family and a team. In a family, it's all about love. It's about unconditional love about your other siblings, despite their behaviors, and this is in contrast with the high-performing team that it is all about pushing your limits and essentially caring about other team members, even if you realize that you might not be on the team forever. Then another very interesting highlight that is, I believe, a Netflix branded notion, that of brilliant And this actually refers to the fact that there's no place for such people in a team at Netflix, because simply they explain it as a matter of cost. The cost is too high for introducing such people in a team, and this could be actually despite the fact that somebody is extremely capable technically. So the idea here is for a team to be, for members of a team to push themselves to their limits, but all this in a collaborative environment, and actually the team is defined as a collection of individuals. And then it closes this first principle with a pretty interesting statement, that is, we suck at compared to how great we want to become. So I guess that the main thing that was highlighted here is, of course, that Netflix is dead serious about building high-performing teams, and also the main takeaway, in my opinion, from this as a candidate, it should be that you make sure that you really show humbleness throughout the interviewing process. Then the second principle of freedom and responsibility essentially refers to what I earlier mentioned of Netflix emphasizing people over process, and probably the best way to understand this is through this one sentence. We believe that people thrive on being trusted, on freedom, and on being able to make a difference, so we foster freedom and empowerment wherever we can. And there's a very interesting example that Reed Hastings gave during an interview, that is, in a business, if you start to favor people that are really good at executing on a process, on a recurrent procedure, you'll end up with a company of people that are really good at executing on something predefined, which is in stark contrast with the culture of innovators and of disruptors. So the main takeaway from this second principle, in my opinion, is to ensure that you have a sense of ownership, that in companies such as Netflix, which are not considered as a huge technology company, so they employ smaller teams with a higher degree of freedom and therefore responsibility, you must ensure that you really can assume ownership over some problems. So probably also the best way to handle this would be to prepare a story around this trait. The next two leadership principles, that of informed captains and to disagree openly, go pretty well together, and they explain the decision-making process at Netflix, and this is through something that they call to farm for dissent, by which essentially means that there should be a captain in charge of every decision that, of course, listens for what everyone has to say, but the main point here is that there is ultimately somebody responsible for the ultimate decision, whether it's successful or not. And this comes in contrast with the other way to handle decision making, that is by panels, which actually diffuse responsibility for the sense of ownership that I mentioned for the previous principles. So this allows Netflix to basically make impactful decisions. So I believe the main takeaway from these two principles is to ensure that you have prepared a story around maybe a success that you had as a leader of a team, as a captain of a team, and to basically make your point that you have the required skills and capabilities to make these types of sometimes hard but impactful decisions. Now, the fifth leadership principle about context but not control is actually very interesting, because they reference Steve Jobs, and actually people openly stating that Steve Jobs was one of the most famous micromanagers in the world. So they basically highlight that example that is not representative of Netflix culture. So needless to say that Netflix is not about micromanagement, but they very much favor people that have indeed those true critical thinking skills. Highly aligned, loosely coupled basically refers to the bureaucracy that characterizes some organizations as they grow, and the way that Netflix fights this is by spending a lot of time on strategy, but then by contrast giving people a lot of responsibility and freedom to execute on whatever strategy they see as the best fit. And finally, seeking excellence refers to Netflix's commitment to not only maintain this unique culture, but to continuously improve it, and especially using its diverse workforce. So probably the main takeaway here for a candidate would be to make sure that you emphasize on your strategic skills as well as your execution, and of course maybe also prepare a little story to highlight this. And I'll explain later in the video why I'm saying that these stories are such a good idea to prepare. It's mainly linked with the behavioral questions during the interview.